The town of Ravenswood nestled deep within the dense woods, far from the noise and chaos of the city. I had moved there to escape the tumultuous pace of urban life, seeking peace and solitude. Little did I know, the tranquility of Ravenswood was but a facade concealing the horrors that lay beneath. The year was 1978, and I had arrived in town with a backpack full of dreams and a desire for a simpler existence. I rented a small, quaint cottage on the outskirts of the town. It was there that I began to notice the oddities, the peculiarities that set Ravenswood apart. The townsfolk, though friendly enough, had an air of unease about them. At the local pub, I struck up a conversation with a weathered old man named Edgar. His words would haunt me for the rest of my days. "The woods, boy," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "The woods are not what they seem. There are things out there, things that should never be seen." I dismissed his words as the ramblings of an old man, but they lingered in my mind. I decided to explore the forest, believing that a closer connection with nature would soothe my growing unease. Also, I was a very curious guy, and this time that character trait of mine almost got me killed. The forest was dense and foreboding, with towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly towards the heavens. As I ventured deeper, the world around me grew silent. Even the birds dared not sing in this eerie wilderness. As I ventured deeper into the dense woods surrounding Ravenswood, the silence was deafening. The eerie stillness of the forest sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel like an intruder in this ancient wilderness. Every step I took seemed to echo through the trees, breaking the unnatural hush. My unease grew as I noticed peculiar markings on the trees, claw-like scratches etched into the bark. I couldn't fathom what creature could have left such marks, and I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees growing taller and more ominous. The air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over me like a heavy shroud. I had no compass, and before I knew it, I was completely disoriented, unable to discern which direction would lead me back to the safety of my cottage. Time lost meaning as I continued to wander deeper into the woods. Panic began to well up inside me, threatening to consume my rational thoughts. I desperately tried to retrace my steps, but the trees all looked the same, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. It was then that I heard it, a low, guttural growl that froze me in my tracks. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and there, emerging from the shadowy undergrowth, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was a massive, hulking figure, covered in matted fur, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The creature's snout was elongated, its teeth sharp and glistening in the muted light filtering through the trees. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I had no weapons, no means to defend myself against this monstrous presence. Fear paralyzed me, and I could only watch as the creature drew nearer, its growls growing louder and more menacing. As it lunged at me, instincts kicked in, and I managed to dive to the side, narrowly avoiding its deadly jaws. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I scrambled to my feet and sprinted blindly through the woods, branches clawing at my face and thorns tearing at my clothes. I ran until I could run no more, finally collapsing in a tangled mess of limbs and fear. The creature had disappeared, but I knew I was still deep within the heart of the forest, far from the safety of Ravenswood. My mind reeled with the realization that something truly unnatural lurked in these woods. I was no longer a spectator in a horror story. I was a character trapped in one. The quaint town of Ravenswood had concealed its dark secret well, and I had stumbled upon it, unprepared and defenseless. My encounter with the monstrous creature had left me shaken to the core. I remained sprawled on the forest floor, gasping for breath, my mind struggling to comprehend the horrors I had just witnessed. As the adrenaline subsided, a sense of vulnerability washed over me. I had no way of knowing if the creature would return, and my only option was to try and find my way back to Ravenswood. But the woods had become an ever-shifting labyrinth, and the path I had taken was lost to me. I rose unsteadily to my feet, my legs aching from the frantic escape. The forest seemed to whisper with malevolent intent, the rustling leaves and creaking branches creating an eerie symphony of dread. Every shadow held the potential for danger, every rustle in the underbrush a source of terror. I began to move cautiously, trying to retrace my steps while keeping an eye out for any signs that might lead me back to civilization. The forest, however, seemed intent on thwarting my efforts. Trees shifted, paths disappeared, and the terrain morphed before my very eyes. Hours stretched into what felt like an eternity as I wandered deeper into the darkness, each step taking me further from the safety of the town. Fear gnawed at the edges of my sanity, threatening to consume me whole. I yearned for the familiarity of streetlights and the comforting hum of city life. The moon cast an eerie glow through the canopy of leaves, revealing glimpses of grotesque, gnarled roots and twisted foliage. It was in that ghostly illumination that I saw more of the claw-like markings etched into the trees, confirming that I was not alone in this nightmarish realm. My throat grew dry, and the pit of my stomach churned with hunger. I had no supplies, no food or water, and exhaustion began to overtake me. My mind teetered on the edge of delirium, and I started to question whether I would ever escape this living nightmare. But then, just as hope began to wane, I stumbled upon a narrow, winding trail, almost hidden amidst the oppressive undergrowth. It was different from the other paths I had encountered, less menacing, more inviting. With renewed determination, I followed it, praying it would lead me out of this cursed forest. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching me, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I quickened my pace, determined to reach the end of this terrible ordeal. Little did I know that the horrors of Ravenswood were not confined to the woods alone. The town itself held secrets darker than I could ever have imagined, and my quest for escape had only just begun. The narrow trail I had discovered wound its way through the forest, leading me deeper into the heart of this otherworldly wilderness. Though it felt like I was escaping the horrors that had pursued me, a growing unease gnawed at my soul. The forest was no longer my only fear. I now questioned the very nature of Ravenswood itself. Hours stretched into what felt like an eternity as I wandered, directionless, through the oppressive woods. The moon, my only companion, cast its eerie glow upon my path, offering little solace. My energy waned, and my steps grew heavier with each passing moment. At long last, I emerged from the woods, stumbling into the outskirts of another town. The moonlight illuminated a sign at the town's entrance. "Welcome to Riverside." Relief washed over me as I realized I had escaped the cursed forest that had held me captive. I was very tired. I wanted to eat, shower, and go to bed. All this I could find in the nearest hotel. However, the first thing I started looking for was the police station. I could not ignore everything that had happened to me. The city seemed unaccustomedly quiet, almost lifeless. Eventually, wandering through town, I met an elderly man sitting on a porch, with a face mottled with wrinkles and a melancholy look in his eyes. I cautiously approached him, and in a trembling voice asked, "Sir, could you please point out the police station?" The old man was silent for a few seconds, and instead of answering, he asked me where I came from. I said I was lost in the woods, but I came from the town of Ravenswood. The old man smiled at me. That smile sent shivers down my spine. "Ravenswood. There is no way," he said. "This is a town shrouded in darkness. Years ago, many tragic events and unexplained deaths occurred in Ravenswood. People began to disappear. A curse came from this forest," he continued. "In the end, most of us couldn't take it anymore. We left Ravenswood behind, hoping to escape the horrors that had consumed it. The town was abandoned, its secrets buried with it." I listened in disbelief as the man recounted the grim history of Ravenswood. It seemed the town had been plagued by the very terrors I had encountered in the forest. The old man concluded, "We don't know what became of Ravenswood. They say ghosts live there, so you're a ghost. The ghost of a scared puppy." And the old man began to laugh. His words frightened me, and I was also frightened by his behavior, so I hurried to get away from the old man. As I walked along the streets, I felt uneasy, and the old man's laughter was ringing in my ears. The question that bothered me was, have I taken to a strange little town again? But in the end, it all turned out all right. I found the police station and told everything that had happened to me. To my surprise, the policemen did not laugh at me. They only exchanged worried glances among themselves. One of them even gave me a friendly pat on the shoulder. The next day, they brought me the things I had left behind in Ravenswood and asked me never to return to that damn town again. Since then, I've preferred to live in big metropolitan areas. As I set foot in the quaint remote village of Blackthorn, nestled amidst the thick woods of the Scottish Highlands, I could sense the eerie stillness that hung in the air. My journey here had been long and arduous, but the mysterious letter that had summoned me was filled with a sense of urgency that I could not ignore. I am Dr. Jonathan Aldridge, a physician by trade, and it was a professional matter that led me to this desolate place. The letter, bearing no signature but penned in an elegant script, spoke of a malady that had befallen the villagers, a sickness unlike any I had ever heard of in my years of medical practice. The journey from Inverness was treacherous, the mist-shrouded moors a labyrinthine maze that seemed to deter any outsider from reaching Blackthorn. It was a place forgotten by time, where ancient superstitions and pagan rituals still held sway over the hearts of its residents. The villagers, upon my arrival, regarded me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The pallor of their skin and the gauntness of their faces were evidence of the affliction that had befallen them. I was led to the humble dwelling of the village elder, an enigmatic figure named Alistair McRae. "Dr. Aldridge," he greeted me with a voice as weathered as the landscape. "I am Alistair McRae, the eldest of this village. We have summoned you in our darkest hour, for we are plagued by a malevolent curse, one that has haunted our ancestors for centuries." He spoke of a curse that struck the villagers, one by one, during the full moon. They transformed into savage beasts, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh. They had named it the Curse of the Wolf. A shiver coursed through my spine as I listened to his tale, a feeling of disbelief mixed with dread. Superstitions and folklore were not unfamiliar to me, but I had always approached them with a skeptical eye. Yet, the fear etched on the faces of the villagers and the strange wounds on their bodies could not be denied. My first evening in Blackthorn was spent in my modest lodgings, where I unpacked my medical instruments and books. I could not ignore the urgency of the situation, and the responsibility of saving these afflicted souls weighed heavily on my shoulders. The following day, I embarked on my mission to understand the nature of this Curse of the Wolf. I ventured to the homes of those who had been affected, each visit revealing a more disturbing truth. The first victim, Mrs. Elspeth Monroe, lived in a quaint cottage at the outskirts of the village. Her husband, a strapping young man named Callum, had recounted the harrowing night when his wife had transformed into a feral beast. The marks on her arms, inflicted by her own claws, were as clear as day. As I examined Mrs. Monroe's wounds, she recounted the terrifying ordeal in a trembling voice. She spoke of a hunger that consumed her, a compulsion to hunt and kill that overtook her rational mind. It was as though she were a passenger in her own body, unable to control the beast within. The second victim, young Ewan McGregor, displayed similar wounds. His parents, Agnes and Douglas, wept as they described the night their son had become a monster. Ewan himself, though still a boy, spoke of the darkness that had enveloped him, a darkness that had made him commit unspeakable acts. My examination revealed nothing medically aberrant in the victims. No toxins, no infections, nothing that could explain their transformation into ravenous creatures during the full moon. In the evening, I sought out the village herbalist, a wizened woman named Moira, who had a reputation for knowledge of the occult. She spoke in hushed tones of a dark ritual performed by the village's ancestors, a pact with an otherworldly entity that granted them power, but also condemned them to this curse. Moira believed that an ancient artifact, the Amulet of the Moon, held the key to breaking the curse. She claimed that it had been hidden away for generations and was said to be guarded by a malevolent spirit deep within the nearby woods. My investigation had led me to a crossroads, a choice between delving further into the occult or adhering to the principles of science. The people of Blackthorn, however, were desperate, and the horrors they had endured could not be explained by rational means alone. With the guidance of Moira, I set out into the foreboding woods to seek the Amulet of the Moon. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows that danced at the edges of my vision. The air was thick with an oppressive presence that made my skin prickle. As I ventured deeper into the woods, I felt the weight of countless eyes upon me, unseen entities that watched my every move. My heart raced, and my lantern flickered ominously. It was then that I heard a guttural growl, low and menacing. I turned to find myself face to face with a monstrous creature, a wolf, but unlike any I had ever seen. Its eyes burned with an unnatural intelligence, and its snarl revealed rows of teeth stained with fresh blood. In the tense moments that followed, I reached for the revolver I had brought with me, praying that it would be enough to fend off the beast. But before I could fire a shot, the creature vanished into the shadows, leaving me trembling in its wake. With renewed determination, I continued my search and, against all odds, stumbled upon a hidden grove. There, beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak tree, I found the Amulet of the Moon, a small silver pendant adorned with a crescent moon. The discovery of the Amulet of the Moon had cast a long shadow over my thoughts. As I clutched the silver pendant in my trembling hand, I couldn't help but wonder about the eerie connection between this artifact and the terrifying transformations plaguing the villagers of Blackthorn. Moira had been right about its significance, but its true purpose remained shrouded in mystery. The pendant felt strangely cold against my skin. With the amulet safely tucked into my coat pocket, I made my way back to the village. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the darkened woods. My encounter with the monstrous wolf had left me unnerved, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent was lurking in the shadows. Upon my return, I sought out Moira once more, eager to delve deeper into the history of the amulet and the curse that had befallen Blackthorn. She greeted me with a solemn nod and beckoned me to sit by the flickering fire in her dimly lit hut. "You've found the amulet, Dr. Aldridge," she whispered, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and trepidation. "But do ye understand what it means? The moon holds great power in these lands, and the pendant is a key to unlocking its mysteries." Moira went on to explain that the Amulet of the Moon was said to have been created by the village's founding ancestors, a relic born of a desperate pact with an otherworldly entity. In exchange for power and protection, the villagers had willingly bound themselves to the lunar cycle, subjecting themselves to the curse of the wolf. "The creature ye encountered in the woods," Moira continued, "is but one manifestation of the curse. It is a guardian, protecting the amulet from those who would seek to break the ancient bond. It is said that the only way to end the curse is to return the pendant to its rightful resting place." I felt a chill run down my spine as Moira's words sank in. It was a daunting prospect, but the suffering of the villagers weighed heavily on my conscience. As the days passed and the full moon drew nearer, a sense of foreboding settled over Blackthorn. The night of the full moon arrived, and with it, an oppressive silence descended upon Blackthorn. The villagers had retreated to their homes, their faces etched with fear and resignation. Moira and Alistair accompanied me to the woods, where we would confront the malevolent spirit guarding the Amulet of the Moon. The forest seemed to come alive with a sinister energy as we approached the hidden grove. The moon hung in the sky, casting an eerie silver light that danced through the dense canopy. I clutched the amulet tightly, its cold metal offering a meager sense of reassurance. As we reached the grove, a low, haunting hum filled the air, emanating from the ancient oak tree. Shadows moved within the gnarled roots, and a spectral figure materialized before us, a wraith-like entity with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce the depths of my soul. It then let out a mournful wail, and the ground trembled beneath our feet. From the earth, grotesque shapes emerged, twisted, monstrous creatures that bore a semblance to wolves, but were far more nightmarish in appearance. My companions and I set off at a run. Fear drove us forward. The werewolves, cursed and tormented, pursued us relentlessly. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, and their feral instincts drove them to capture us and prevent us from breaking the curse. The werewolves closed in, their snarls and growls echoing through the night. With the amulet clutched tightly in my hand, I knew there was only one way to end this nightmare. I made a final sprint towards the ancient oak tree, the werewolves hot on my heels. With a burst of strength and courage, I thrust the Amulet of the Moon into the earth beneath the tree. The ground trembled, and a blinding light enveloped the grove. The werewolves howled in agony as the curse that had tormented them for so long was lifted. When the light finally faded, the village of Blackthorn was free from the curse. The werewolves lay still, their monstrous forms replaced by their human selves.